May 5, 1993. West Memphis, Arkansas, a small town shocked by a crime so brutal, it became the center of national attention. 3 8-year-old boys, Stevie Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, were found murdered in a wooded area known as Robin Hood Hills. What followed was a trial filled with fear, prejudice, and questions that still haunt this case today. 3 teenagers, dubbed the West Memphis Three, were quickly arrested and convicted. To the public, it seemed justice had been served. But beneath the surface of this case lies a deep iceberg of flawed investigations, coerced confessions, and lingering doubt that would spark a decades-long fight for the truth. Hello and welcome to the Grim Files. In this episode, we'll unravel the events that turned this small-town tragedy into a global controversy. Who were the real victims of the West Memphis Three case? And after years of questions and appeals, was justice ever truly served? This is the story of the West Memphis Three. On May 5, 1993, 3 8-year-old boys, Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, were reported missing in West Memphis, Arkansas. The first report to the police was made by Byers' adoptive father, John Mark Byers, around 7 p.m. The boys were reportedly last seen together around 6:30 p.m. on the evening of their disappearance, as described by 3 neighbors in sworn affidavits. They recalled seeing the boys playing together and Terry Hobbs, Stevie Branch's stepfather, calling them to come home. That night, initial police searches were minimal, leaving much of the effort to friends and neighbors. Their search included a brief visit to the area where the boys' bodies would tragically be discovered later. The Crittenden County Search and Rescue Team led a more extensive search for the boys around 8 a.m. on May 6. Search efforts spanned West Memphis but concentrated heavily on Robin Hood Hills, the area where the boys were last reported seen. Despite conducting a thorough and coordinated search of Robin Hood Hills, the searchers found no trace of the missing children. Around 1:45 p.m., juvenile parole officer Steve Jones spotted a boy's black shoe floating in a muddy creek that led to a major drainage canal in Robin Hood Hills. A subsequent search of the ditch revealed the bodies of 3 boys. They had been stripped naked and were hogtied with their own shoelaces, their right ankles tied to their right wrists behind their backs, the same with their left arms and legs. Their clothing was found in the creek, some of it twisted around sticks that had been thrust into the muddy ditch bed. The clothing was mostly turned inside out. 2 pairs of the boys' underwear were never recovered. Christopher Byers had lacerations to various parts of his body and mutilation of his scrotum and penis. A truly horrifying sight to stumble upon. The autopsies by forensic pathologist Frank J. Peretti indicated that Byers died of multiple injuries, while Moore and Branch died of multiple injuries with drowning. Police initially suspected the boys had been raped, however, later expert testimony disputed this finding. Trace amounts of sperm DNA were found on a pair of pants recovered from the scene. Prosecution experts claimed Byers' wounds were the results of a knife attack and that the murderer had purposely castrated him. Defense experts claimed the injuries were most likely the result of post-mortem animal predation. Police believed the boys were assaulted and killed at the location where they were found, while critics argued that the assault, at least, was unlikely to have occurred at the creek. As you can see, this case has been the subject of intense scrutiny and widespread debate from the very start. Almost every aspect of the investigation and trial has been questioned, leaving the public, legal experts, and even forensic specialists divided. Now, let's take a look at the victims and their short lives prior to their tragic end. Steve Edward Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore were all second graders at Weaver Elementary School. Each had achieved the rank of Wolf in the local Cub Scout pack and were best friends. Cubs, also known as Wolf Cubs, are programs associated with some Scout organizations, for children aged between 8 and 10 or 12. A participant in the program is called a Cub and a group of Cubs is called a pack. When a child reaches the second grade, they get the rank of Wolf. Steve Branch was the son of Stephen and Pamela Branch, who divorced when he was an infant. His mother was awarded custody and later married Terry Hobbs. Branch was 8 years old, 4 feet 2 tall, weighed 65 pounds and had blonde hair. He was last seen wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt and riding a black and red bicycle. He was an honor student. He lived with his mother, Pamela Hobbs, his stepfather, Terry Hobbs, and a 4-year-old half-sister, Amanda. Steve Edward Branch is buried in Mount Zion Cemetery in Steele, Missouri. Michael Moore was the son of Todd and Dana Moore. He was 8 years old, 4 feet 2 tall, weighed 55 pounds, and had brown hair. He was last seen wearing blue pants, a blue Boy Scouts of America shirt, an orange and blue Boy Scout hat, and riding a light green bicycle. Moore enjoyed wearing his scout uniform even when he was not at meetings. He was considered the leader of the three. He lived with his parents and his 9-year-old sister, Dawn. James Michael Moore is buried in Crittenden Memorial Park Cemetery in Marion, Arkansas. Christopher Byers was born to Melissa DeFeer and Ricky Murray. His parents divorced when he was 4 years old, and shortly afterward his mother married John Mark Byers, who adopted the boy. Byers was 8 years old, 4 feet tall, weighed 52 pounds, and had light brown hair. He was last seen wearing blue jeans, dark shoes, and a white long-sleeved shirt. He lived with his mother, Sharon Melissa Byers, his adoptive father, John Mark Byers, and his stepbrother, Sean Ryan Clark, aged 13. According to his mother, Christopher was a typical 8-year-old. He still believed in the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus. Christopher Mark Byers is buried in Forest Hill Cemetery East in Memphis, Tennessee. In 1994, a memorial was erected for the 3 murder victims. It's located in the playground of Weaver Elementary School in West Memphis, where all 3 victims were second graders at the time of the crime. In May 2013, for the 20th anniversary of the slayings, Weaver Elementary School Principal Sheila Grissom raised funds to refurbish the memorial. The main suspects in the crime are Baldwin, Eccles, and Miskelly. At the time of their arrests, Jesse Miskelly Jr. was 17 years old, Jason Baldwin was 16 years old, and Damian Eccles was 18 years old. Baldwin and Eccles had been previously arrested for vandalism and shoplifting respectively, and Miskelly had a reputation for his temper and for engaging in fistfights with other teenagers at school. Miskelly and Eccles had dropped out of high school. However, Baldwin earned high grades, demonstrated a talent for drawing and sketching, and was encouraged by one of his teachers to study graphic design in college. Eccles and Baldwin were close friends and bonded over their similar tastes in music and fiction, and over their shared distaste for the prevailing cultural climate of West Memphis, situated in the Bible Belt. Eccles and Baldwin were acquainted with Miskelly from school but were not close friends with him. Eccles came from a poor family, received frequent visits from social workers, and rarely attended school. He and a girlfriend had run off and later broke into a trailer during a rainstorm for shelter. They were arrested, though only Eccles was charged with burglary. Eccles spent several months in a mental institution in Arkansas and afterward received full disability status from the Social Security Administration. During Eccles' trial, Dr. George Woods testified for the defense that Eccles suffered from a serious mental illness characterized by grandiose and persecutory delusions, auditory and visual hallucinations, disordered thought processes, substantial lack of insight, and chronic, incapacitating mood swings. At his sentencing hearing for the death penalty, his psychologist testified that months prior to the murders, Eccles had claimed he gained superpowers by drinking human blood. At the time of his arrest, Eccles was employed part-time at a roofing company and was anticipating the birth of a child with his girlfriend, Domini Tier. We can safely assume that Damian Eccles wasn't a sane person. Early in the investigation, the West Memphis Police Department briefly regarded other 2 West Memphis teenagers as suspects. Chris Morgan and Brian Holland, both with drug offense histories, had abruptly departed for Oceanside, California, 4 days after the bodies were discovered. Morgan was presumed to be at least casually familiar with all 3 murdered boys, having previously driven an ice cream truck route in their neighborhood. Morgan and Holland were arrested in Oceanside on May 17, 1993, and underwent polygraph tests administered by California police. The examiners reported signs of deception when both men denied involvement in the murders. During further questioning, Morgan admitted to a long history of drug and alcohol abuse, as well as blackouts and memory lapses. He briefly suggested that he might have killed the victims, but soon retracted this statement. California police sent blood and urine samples from Morgan and Holland to the West Memphis Police Department, but there is no indication that the West Memphis Police Department investigated Morgan or Holland as suspects following their arrest in California. The relevance of Morgan's recanted statement would later be debated in the trial, but it was eventually barred from admission as evidence. Another suspected murderer goes by the name of Mr. Bojangles. At the start of the Miskelly trial, the possibility of a black male as an alternate suspect was suggested. According to local West Memphis police, on the evening of May 5, 1993, at 8:42 p.m., employees at the Bojangles restaurant, about a mile from the crime scene in Robin Hood Hills, reported a black male who appeared, mentally disoriented, in the women's restroom. The man was bleeding and had smeared blood on the restroom walls. Officer Regina Meeks responded to the call and took the manager's report through the drive-through window. By the time she arrived, the man had already left, and police did not inspect the restroom that day. The day after the victims' bodies were found, Bojangles manager Marty King, thinking there was a possible connection to the bleeding man found in the bathroom, reported the incident to police officers who then inspected the ladies' room. The man reportedly wore a blue cast-type brace on his arm that had white Velcro on it, which would have made it difficult to tie up and murder 3 young boys. King gave the officers a pair of sunglasses he thought the man had left behind, and the detectives took some blood samples from the walls and tiles of the restroom. Police Detective Bryn Ridge testified that he later lost those blood scrapings. A hair identified as belonging to a black male was later recovered from a sheet wrapped around one of the victims. The fact that a maybe critical piece of evidence, such as the blood samples, has been handled so irresponsibly and lost is mind-blowing to me. Anyways, back to the story. Police officers James Sudbury and Steve Jones felt that the crime had cult overtones and that Damien Eccles might be a suspect because he had an interest in occultism, and Jones felt Eccles was capable of murdering children. The police interviewed Eccles on May 7th, 2 days after the bodies were discovered. During a polygraph examination, he denied any involvement. The polygraph examiner claimed that Eccles' chart indicated deception. On May 9th, during a formal interview by Detective Bryn Ridge, Eccles mentioned that one of the victims had wounds to the genitals. Law enforcement viewed this knowledge as incriminating. No physical evidence connected Eccles, Baldwin, or Miskelly to the crime. After a month had passed with little progress in the case, police continued to focus their investigation on Eccles, interrogating him more frequently than any other person. Nonetheless, they claimed he was not regarded as a direct suspect but as a source of information. On June 3rd, the police interrogated Jesse Miskelly Jr. despite his reported IQ of 72, categorizing him as borderline intellectual functioning, and his status as a minor. Miskelly was questioned alone. His parents were not present during the interrogation. Miskelly's father gave permission for Miskelly to go with the police but did not explicitly give permission for his son to be questioned or interrogated. Miskelly was questioned for roughly 12 hours. Only 2 segments, totaling 46 minutes, were recorded. Miskelly quickly recanted his confession, citing intimidation, coercion, fatigue, and veiled threats from police. Miskelly specifically said he was scared of the police during this confession. Though he was informed of his Miranda rights, Miskelly later claimed he did not fully understand them. In 1996, the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled that Miskelly's confession was voluntary and that he did, in fact, understand the Miranda warning and its consequences. Portions of Miskelly's statements to the police were leaked to the press and reported on the front page of the Memphis Commercial Appeal before any of the trials began. Shortly after Miskelly's first confession, police arrested Eccles and his close friend Baldwin. 8 months after his original confession, on February 17, 1994, Miskelly made another statement to police. His lawyer, Dan Stidham, remained in the room and continually advised Miskelly not to say anything. Miskelly ignored this advice and went on to detail how the boys were abused and murdered. Stidham, who was later elected to a municipal judgeship, has written a detailed critique of what he asserts are major police errors and misconceptions during their investigation. Stidham made similar comments during a radio show interview in May 2010. At the trial of Eccles and Baldwin, the physical evidence presented included 2 green threads found at the crime scene, which a state witness testified were microscopically similar to a green child's t-shirt located in Eccles' sister's closet. Additionally, a red rayon fiber was introduced, which the witness claimed resembled a women's robe found in Baldwin's home. However, under further questioning, the witness admitted that many fibers can appear microscopically similar, and that this evidence did not conclusively prove anything. Now, let's talk about someone new. Someone who just recently moved to West Memphis, but would play an important role in the investigation, Vicki Hutchison. Despite her critical role, she would later recant her testimony, claiming her statements were fabricated due in part to coercion from police. On May 6, 1993, before the victims were found later the same day, Hutchison took a polygraph exam by Detective Don Bray at the Marion Police Department to determine whether or not she had stolen money from her West Memphis employer. Hutchison's young son, Aaron, was also present and proved such a distraction that Bray was unable to administer the polygraph. Aaron, a playmate of the murdered boys, mentioned to Bray that the boys had been killed at the playhouse. When the bodies proved to have been discovered near where Aaron indicated, Bray asked Aaron for further details, and Aaron claimed that he had witnessed the murders committed by Satanists who spoke Spanish. Aaron's further statements were wildly inconsistent, and he was unable to identify Baldwin, Eccles, or Miss Kelly from photo lineups, and there was no playhouse at the location Aaron indicated. A police officer leaked portions of Aaron's statements to the press, contributing to the growing belief that the murders were part of a satanic rite. On or about June 1, 1993, Hutchison agreed to police suggestions to place hidden microphones in her home during an encounter with Eccles. Miss Kelly agreed to introduce Hutchison to Eccles. During their conversation, Hutchison reported that Eccles made no incriminating statements. Police said the recording was inaudible, but Hutchison claimed the recording was audible. On June 2, 1993, Hutchison told police that about 2 weeks after the murders were committed, she, Eccles, and Miss Kelly attended a Wiccan meeting in Torrell, Arkansas. Hutchison claimed that, at the Wiccan meeting, a drunken Eccles openly bragged about killing the 3 boys. Miss Kelly was first questioned on June 3, 1993, a day after Hutchison's purported confession. Hutchison was unable to recall the Wiccan meeting location and did not name any other participants in the purported meeting. Hutchison was never charged with theft. She claimed she had implicated Eccles and Miss Kelly to avoid facing criminal charges and to obtain a reward for the discovery of the murderers. Miss Kelly was tried separately, and Eccles and Baldwin were tried together in 1994. Under the Bruton rule, Miss Kelly's confession could not be admitted against his co-defendants, thus he was tried separately. All 3 defendants pleaded not guilty. During Miss Kelly's trial, Richard Offsch, an expert on false confessions and police coercion, and professor of sociology at UC Berkeley, testified that the brief recording of Miss Kelly's interrogation was a classic example of police coercion. Critics have also stated that Miss Kelly's various confessions were in many respects inconsistent with each other, as well as with the particulars of the crime scene and murder victims, including, for example, an admission that Miss Kelly watched Damien rape one of the boys. Police had initially suspected that the victims had been raped because their anuses were dilated. However, there was no forensic evidence indicating that the murdered boys had been raped. Dilation of the anus is a normal post-mortem condition. On February 5, 1994, Miss Kelly was convicted by a jury of 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. The court sentenced him to life plus 40 years in prison. His conviction was appealed, but the Arkansas Supreme Court affirmed the conviction. 3 weeks later, Eccles and Baldwin went on trial. The prosecution accused the 3 young men of committing a satanic murder. The prosecution called Dale W. Griffiths, a graduate of the unaccredited Columbia Pacific University, as an expert in the occult to testify the murders were a satanic ritual. On March 19, 1994, Eccles and Baldwin were found guilty of 3 counts of murder. The court sentenced Eccles to death and Baldwin to life in prison. At trial, the defense team argued that news articles from the time could have been the source for Eccles' knowledge about genital mutilation, and Eccles said his knowledge was limited to what was on TV, although I doubt there was much talk about genital mutilation on TV. The prosecution claimed that Eccles' knowledge was nonetheless too close to the facts since there was no public reporting of drowning or that one victim had been mutilated more than the others. Eccles testified that Detective Ridge's description of their earlier conversation, which was not recorded, regarding those particular details was inaccurate, and indeed that some other claims by Ridge were lies. Mara Leverett, an investigative journalist and the author of Devil's Knot, argues that Eccles' information may have come from police leaks, such as Detective Gitchell's comments to Mark Byers, that circulated amongst the local public. The defense team objected when the prosecution attempted to question Eccles about his past violent behaviors, but the defense objections were overruled. Crazy stuff so far, right? If you enjoy my content, please leave a like and subscribe if you are interested in seeing more videos like this. Now, let's talk about what happened after the investigations and trials concluded. There has been widespread criticism of the handling of the crime scene by the police. Ms. Skelly's former attorney Dan Stidham cites multiple substantial police errors at the crime scene, characterizing it as literally trampled, especially the creek bed. The bodies, he said, had been removed from the water before the coroner arrived to examine the scene and determine the state of rigor mortis, allowing the bodies to decay on the creek bank and to be exposed to sunlight and insects. The police did not telephone the coroner until almost 2 hours after the discovery of the floating shoe, resulting in a late appearance by the coroner. Officials failed to drain the creek in a timely manner and secure possible evidence in the water. The creek was sandbagged after the bodies were pulled from the water. Stidham has called the coroner's investigation extremely substandard. There was a small amount of blood found at the scene that was never tested. According to HBO's documentaries Paradise Lost, The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills, 1996, and Paradise Lost 2, Revelations, 2000, no blood was found at the crime scene, indicating that the location where the bodies were found was not necessarily the location where the murders actually happened. After the initial investigation, the police failed to control the disclosure of information and speculation about the crime scene. When police speculated about the assailant, the juvenile probation officer assisting at the scene of the murders speculated that Eccles was capable of committing the murders, stating, "It looks like Damien Eccles finally killed someone." Brent Turvey, a forensic scientist and criminal profiler, stated in the film Paradise Lost 2 that human bite marks could have been left on at least one of the victims. However, these potential bite marks were first noticed in photographs years after the trials and were not inspected by a board-certified medical examiner until 4 years after the murders. The defense's expert testified that the mark in question was not an adult bite mark, while experts put on by the state concluded that there was no bite mark at all. The state's experts had examined the actual bodies for any marks, and others conducted expert photo analysis of injuries. Upon further examination, it was concluded that if these marks were bite marks, they did not match the teeth of any of the 3 convicted. In May 1994, the 3 defendants appealed their convictions, which were upheld on direct appeal. In June 1996, Ms. Skelly's lawyer, Dan Stidham, was preparing an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2007, Eccles petitioned for a retrial, based on a statute permitting post-conviction testing of DNA evidence due to technological advances made since 1994 which might provide exoneration for the wrongfully convicted. The petition failed when the original trial judge, Judge David Burnett, disallowed the presentation of this information in his court. On November 4, 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court overturned this ruling for all 3 defendants. John Mark Byers, the adoptive father of Christopher Byers, one of the victims, gave a folding hunting knife to Doug Cooper, a cameraman working with documentary filmmakers Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky during the production of the first Paradise Lost film. According to Berlinger and Sinofsky, Cooper informed them about receiving the knife on December 19, 1993. After returning to New York, the filmmakers reportedly noticed what appeared to be blood on the knife. HBO executives instructed them to hand the knife over to the West Memphis Police Department, where it was ultimately received on January 8, 1994. Byers initially claimed the knife had never been used. However, after blood was discovered on it, he admitted to using it once to cut deer meat. When informed that the blood matched both his and Christopher's blood types, Byers said he had no explanation for how the blood got on the knife. During questioning, West Memphis police suggested that Byers might have accidentally left the knife out, and he agreed with this possibility. He later stated he might have cut his thumb. Further testing on the knife yielded inconclusive results regarding the blood's origin, leaving uncertainty due to the small quantity of blood present. Byers agreed to and passed a polygraph test about the murders during the filming of Paradise Lost 2, Revelations, but the documentary indicated that Byers was under the influence of several psychoactive prescription medications that could have affected the test results. After their convictions, Eccles, Miskelly, and Baldwin provided dental impressions, which were compared to alleged bite marks on Stevie Branch's forehead that had not been noted during the original autopsy or trial. No matches were found. John Mark Byers, however, had his teeth removed in 1997, after the first trial but before his dental impressions could be taken. Byers' stated reasons for the removal appear contradictory. He has claimed that seizure medication caused periodontal disease and also that he had long planned the removal due to ongoing dental issues. After an expert examined autopsy photos and noted what he thought might be the imprint of a belt buckle on Byers' corpse, the elder Byers revealed to the police that he had spanked his stepson shortly before the boy disappeared. In October 2003, Vicki Hutchison, who had played a part in the arrests of Miskelly, Eccles, and Baldwin, gave an interview to the Arkansas Times in which she stated that every word she had given to the police was a fabrication. She further asserted that the police had implied that if she did not cooperate with them, they would take away her child. She said that when she visited the police station, employees had photographs of Eccles, Baldwin, and Miskelly on the wall and were using them as dart targets. She also claims that an autotape the police said was unintelligible, and that they eventually lost, was perfectly clear and contained no incriminating statements. In 2007, DNA collected from the crime scene was tested. None was found to match DNA from Eccles, Baldwin, or Miskelly. A hair, not inconsistent with Stevie Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs, was found tied into the knots used to bind one of the victims. The prosecutors, while conceding that no DNA evidence tied the accused to the crime scene, said, "The state stands behind its convictions of Eccles and his co-defendants." Pamela Hobbs' May 5, 2009, declaration in the United States District Court, Eastern District of Arkansas, Western Division indicates that one hair was consistent with the hair of Terry's friend David Jacoby. And additionally, after the murders, my sister Jo Lynn McCaughey and I found in Terry's nightstand a knife that Stevie carried with him constantly, and which I had believed was with him when he died. It was a pocket knife that my father had given to Stevie, and Stevie loved that knife. I had been shocked that the police did not find it with Stevie when they found his body. I had always assumed that my son's murderer had taken the knife during the crime. I could not believe it was in Terry's things. He had never told me that he had it. Also, my sister Jo Lynn said to me that she saw Terry wash clothes, bed linens and curtains from Stevie's room at an odd time around the time of the murders. In 2013, written statements from two men, Billy Wayne Stewart and Benny Guy, were introduced in the court. They both claimed to have had information on the case linking Terry Hobbs to the murders, but were ignored by police initially. In July 2008, it was revealed that Kent Arnold, the jury foreman in the Eccles-Baldwin trial, had discussed the case with an attorney before deliberations began. Arnold was accused of promoting the guilt of the West Memphis Three and sharing inadmissible evidence, including Jesse Miskelly's statements, with fellow jurors. Legal experts at the time suggested this could potentially lead to the convictions of Jason Baldwin and Damian Eccles being overturned. In September 2008, attorney Daniel Stidham, who represented Misskelley in 1994 and is now a judge, testified at a post-conviction relief hearing. Stidham stated under oath that Judge David Burnett committed an error during the trial by engaging in improper communication with the jury during deliberations. Stidham recounted overhearing Judge Burnett discussing a lunch break with the jury foreman, who mentioned that the jury was nearly finished. According to Stidham, Judge Burnett replied, "You'll need food for when you come back for sentencing." When the foreman asked what would happen if the defendant was acquitted, Judge Burnett allegedly closed the door without responding. Stidham further testified that his own failure to document this incident in the court record, along with his inability to meet state law's minimum requirements for representing a defendant in a capital murder case, constituted ineffective assistance of counsel. He argued that these factors warranted vacating Misskelley's conviction. On October 29, 2007, Eccles's defense attorneys filed papers in federal court requesting a retrial or his immediate release from prison. The filing highlighted DNA evidence allegedly linking Terry Hobbs, the stepfather of one of the victims, to the crime scene, along with new statements from Hobbs's ex-wife. Additionally, the defense introduced expert testimony indicating that the supposed knife wounds on the victims, including the injuries to Christopher Byers' genitals, were actually caused by animal predation after the bodies had been discarded. On September 10, 2008, Circuit Court Judge David Burnett denied the request for a retrial, citing the DNA tests as inconclusive. That ruling was appealed to the Arkansas Supreme Court, which heard oral arguments in the case on September 30, 2010. On November 4, 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court directed a lower court to assess whether newly analyzed DNA evidence could exonerate the West Memphis Three. The court also instructed the lower judge to investigate allegations of juror misconduct during the trials that led to Damian Eccles receiving a death sentence, and Jesse Misskelley and Jason Baldwin receiving life sentences. In early December 2010, David Burnett, who had presided over the original trials, was elected to the Arkansas State Senate. Circuit Court Judge David Laser was appointed to replace Burnett and oversee the evidentiary hearings required by the Supreme Court's ruling. After weeks of negotiations, on August 19, 2011, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Misskelley were released from prison as part of a plea deal, rendering the hearings mandated by the Arkansas Supreme Court unnecessary. The three entered Alford pleas, allowing them to assert their innocence while acknowledging that prosecutors had sufficient evidence to secure convictions. Stephen Braga, a pro bono attorney from Ropes and Gray who joined Eccles's defense in 2009, negotiated the plea agreement with prosecutors. As part of the plea deal, Judge David Laser vacated the previous convictions, including the capital murder convictions for Eccles and Baldwin, and ordered a new trial. The three men then entered Alford's pleas to lesser charges of first and second-degree murder while maintaining their innocence. Judge Laser sentenced them to time served 18 years and 78 days, and imposed a suspended imposition of sentence for 10 years. Under this arrangement, any reoffense could result in a return to prison for up to 21 years. Prosecutor Scott Ellington cited several factors for agreeing to the plea deal, including the support of two victims' families for the defense, doubts raised by the mother of a key witness about her daughter's testimony regarding Eccles's alleged confession, and the death of the state crime lab employee who had collected fiber evidence from Eccles's and Baldwin's homes. As part of the agreement, the three men waived their right to pursue civil lawsuits against the state for wrongful imprisonment. Many supporters of the men, as well as opponents who still believed them guilty, were dissatisfied with the unusual plea deal. In 2011, supporters of Eccles, Baldwin, and Misskelley urged Arkansas Governor Mike Beebe to pardon them based on their innocence. However, Beebe stated he would deny the request unless there were evidence pointing to another individual as the true perpetrator of the murders. Prosecutor Scott Ellington announced that the Arkansas State Crime Laboratory would assist in identifying other possible suspects by running searches on DNA evidence obtained from private lab tests during the defense team's investigation. This would include checking the results against the FBI's combined DNA index system, CODIS. Ellington, while still maintaining that the men were guilty, acknowledged that they would likely be acquitted if a new trial took place due to the strong legal representation they now had, the loss of key evidence over time, and the changed testimonies of some witnesses. The families of the 3 victims remained divided in their opinions regarding the guilt or innocence of the West Memphis Three. In 2000, Rick Murray, the biological father of Christopher Byers, expressed his doubts about the guilty verdicts on the West Memphis Three website. In 2007, Pamela Hobbs, the mother of victim Stevie Branch, publicly joined those questioning the verdicts, advocating for a reopening of the case and further investigation of the evidence. Later in 2007, John Mark Byers, who had previously been adamant in his belief that Eccles, Miskelly, and Baldwin were guilty, changed his stance and declared that he now believed they were innocent. Byers stated, "I had made the comment if it were ever proven the 3 were innocent, I'd be the first to lead the charge for their freedom," and vowed to use every opportunity that I have to voice that the West Memphis Three are innocent, and the evidence and proof prove they're innocent. He has since spoken to the media on behalf of the convicted men and expressed his desire for justice for both the victims' families and the 3 men accused. So, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into this disturbing case, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future episodes just like this. Have a wonderful day.